friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the chapter conundrum. And in today's video, I thought it would be really fun, or at least fun for me, to go and have a look at my reading spreadsheet and talk to you guys about some of my mid-year stats so far. What trends I'm noticing in my reading stats when I compare it to last year, and what changes I'm noticing, what things about my reading are staying fairly consistent, what things are changing. I thought it would be interesting to take a look with you guys and talk about it. So just so you guys know, this is going to encompass everything I read up until the end of June. I'm not going to include anything in July so far. So first up, I need to move myself over so I have room to put graphs and stuff here before I forget. So give me a second. And the first one I'm going to talk to you guys about is going to be my basic Goodreads goal. How many books do I plan to read, and how am I doing progress-wise with that? So both last year and this year, my goal has been 120 books. And so far this year, I'm at 62. And last year at the end of June, I was at 59. So I'm doing a little bit better than I was at this time last year, but still not as far along as I would like to be. Usually it's not a problem for me to read 10 books in a month, but I've had kind of a mixed bag this year, as you'll see when we get further along. So next up, how many pages have I read so far? And in 2024, so far, I have read 23,105 pages. Compared to this time in 2023, it was 24,457. So I've read like 1,300 less pages, so it's not a drastic difference. It's a couple books worth, maybe, or one really long book if it's Outlander. But either way, not anything I'm concerned about, especially because I know that I've had some stuff going on in June and didn't read a ton. Interestingly though, this stat has kind of slowed down for me over the years. I used to do roughly 1,000 pages a week, and I found that 52,000 was a great overall page goal for the year, but I've been like kind of dancing around 50 the last couple of years, so it's been slowing down just a smidge, but not drastically. I still feel like I get tons of reading in. One big change I have noticed in my reading this year is the amount of rereads I've been doing. So typically I'm not much of a rereader. I always say, oh, I'm not really one for rereading something. But this year I've already done 6 rereads, whereas last year I did 7 for the entire year. And I'm going to go ahead and blame my husband Jake for this, because he decided that we needed to do a reread of the Harry Potter series for nostalgia's sake. So I've been on that train, and that's partly what some of my rereads this year are. But also, there is a good reason for 2 of my rereads this year. The first and second book in the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. I had read those years and years ago, but then failed to continue the series because my buddy reader fell out of reading. So this year I reread those and finally finished the series. So I'm not overly worried about the amount of rereads I've been doing. They do feel fun, or that they have been purposeful, but it is definitely a big change in my reading stats. So I thought it would be fun to talk about. One of my massive reading goals for the last couple of years has been to finish some dang series. So read those sequels, finish those series out. So I'm going to talk about a few stats that relate to that. And the first one is, how many books am I picking up that are standalones versus books in series? And so far this year it's about 50-50, but last year it was a little bit more slanted towards books in series. I think the main reason for that this year is that early in the year I participate in a few readathons, and I tend to veer more towards standalones for those because they're usually shorter and something I can get through quickly. Whereas I tend to read more series or sequels towards the second half of the year. I always do something called Sequel September, where I try and get my September TBR to be entirely made up of sequels as much as possible. So I'm not too worried about this difference right now. I feel like it'll all even out at the end of the year. But really, the stats that tell me more about how I'm progressing with my finish some dang series goal is, how many series have I started, how many sequels have I read to continue on with series, how many series have I finished, and how many series have I decided not to continue with. So this year so far, I have started 11 new series, I have read 12 sequels, but I have finished out 9 series, so I'm feeling pretty happy about that. And I've decided not to continue with 4. So really, if you think about it, I have started less series than I have finished, and I have progressed with sequels on top of that. So I'm pretty happy with these numbers as it stands right now. But how do they compare to 2023? So for the whole year of 2023, I started 22 series. So if I'm at 11 now, that's right on track to where I was. I read 35 sequels. So Currently, I'm at 12 for the year this year, so not as great as I was doing last year. So that is something that I'm gonna be improving with my sequel September TBR for sure. I finished a whopping 28 series last year, and so far this year I'm at 9. So again, I'm kind of slacking, but I will say this year I anticipate my finished series count being much lower because now I'm at the point where I've finished out all the ones I had one book left in, and now the finishes are going to be coming a little bit more slowly because I'm going to have to read more books to finish those out. So I'm not so worried about this count being at 9, but I am happy that I've managed to at least hit that progress mark of finishing all the series where I only had one book left in to read. And then last year I decided not to continue on with 9 series. So being at 4 right now this year, that's pretty much on track for where I was last year. I'm not really overly surprised about that. So overall, I feel like I've made some really great progress towards my goal of finishing some dang series. I think I'm currently in the middle of 23. So I will count it up and put a number here just to let you know. And at some point, I'll have to do a video talking to you guys about which series I'm actually working on. But for now, I'm just gonna leave the number. And I do update this number anytime it changes on our Discord in my server profile name. So that's a fun way of keeping myself accountable as well. So next up, we're gonna look at my charts of how many books I'm reading each month. And this is actually funny for me because I am just now looking at these properly and realizing that I have a pattern. And that pattern is to stay pretty consistent with an average number of books January, February, and March, read a ton in April because of our Battle of the Bands readathons, and then in May either read an average number or a little bit less, probably because I'm a little bit tired of reading from the readathon, and then in June my reading takes a nosedive off a cliff and sadly tanks. And then in July we have a readathon again, so it shoots way back up. But it is funny for me to see this trend 2 years in a row now. Though I do think that the reason my reading has taken nosedives in June last year and this year are different. So last year I had just gotten home from visiting with Jake and I was sick. His nephew gave me some kind of bug right before I got home. So the first while I was home, I was pretty much like resting. I didn't feel like reading. I couldn't really concentrate very well. And then a couple days after getting home, and just when I felt like I was starting to recover, we ended up unexpectedly fostering a new dog, Milo, that now I'm sure if you're in the Discord, you know my sister has adopted him full time. But when we first got him, it was a lot of me paying a lot of attention to him, making sure he was adjusting well, trying to learn more about his personality and what he liked, if he was going to react to certain things, making sure that our other dogs were behaving with him and being nice to him and welcoming him. Essentially, I was doing a lot of supervision and not a lot of reading last June. And then this year, my reading in June kind of fell off a cliff because I decided to start my own channel. So I was focusing a lot of my free time and energy into filming, editing, learning things about YouTube creation in general. And then towards the end of the month, once I finally felt like I had caught up with that a bit, I ended up getting a whole bunch of random appointments for immigration type things. So I think like within the span of a week, I had like 5 random appointments. And then 2 of those appointments were to update some vaccinations so that I was all set for that. And then I was feeling crappy after those. And again, didn't want to read while I was feeling yucky. So it is funny to see this trend be quite so drastic 2 years in a row for very different reasons. And it will be interesting to see if I have a similar thing happen next June or whether I will break the June reading curse. So let's talk about my average ratings. Am I enjoying the things I'm picking up? So far this year, my average star rating is 3.85, which I feel like is fairly normal for me. I'm usually kind of a tough rater, so I'm not surprised to see this under a 4. But then looking at my average rating for all of 2023, it was 3.86. So apparently I'm very consistent with my ratings, but I am actually kind of surprised at this being so similar because in the month of April this year, I had a ton of 5-star reads, like more 5 stars than I usually have in a lengthy span. And I don't really remember having any like drastically bad reads. I haven't given out any 1 stars this year, and I've only given out a handful of 2s. So it must just be like a fair amount of 3-star books and not a ton of higher 4s or 5s this year. Hopefully by the end of the year, the average rating will be higher, especially because I want to try and read some 5-star predictions later in the year. So another fun stat that I track on my reading spreadsheet is how many buddy reads or group reads I'm doing every year. And typically this number has been very high in the past. And that's actually part of the reason why I got myself into a situation where I had so many freaking ongoing series, because I would find all these buddy reads for series that I was interested in, and then either I would only buddy read the first one and then hop into a different buddy read for a different book, or we would have a buddy read plan for the whole series, and then either my buddy or I wouldn't follow through with that plan for whatever reason. So this has been a fun one for me to track over the years. And this year so far, I'm up to 17 buddy reads. So out of, what did I say, 62 books? That's actually a very minimal percentage for me. It's only about, what, a quarter of my reading? That's a bit atypical. But I'm not mad about it. Like I said, I am happy to be continuing on with some series and prioritizing that over having quite so many buddy reads. So last year as a whole, I read 60 books that were part of buddy reads or group reads. So definitely a way more significant chunk of my reading was buddy reads. And I think in 2022 and 2021, that number was even higher. So that's pretty wild. I think I have gotten a lot better at telling myself that just because I want to read something does not mean that I want to read it right now or right when that read along is happening. And I've sort of let myself let go of the idea of joining all of the buddy reads for all of the things I just want to read, because it has felt good to kind of have more space for mood reading, more space to switch up what genre I'm reading so that I don't fall into reading slumps, and just be able to do my own thing a little bit more often. But mind you, I'm still a sucker for buddy reads, and I still really enjoy doing them when I can. So next up, I want to touch on the demographics of what I'm reading. So this year so far, 73% of my reads have been adult books, 16% have been young adult books, and then I have a few outliers of children's, middle grade, and new adult. But last year, for the whole year, 85% of my books were adult books and only 9% were YA, with some outliers for middle grade and new adult. And I think the biggest reason for the difference in this stat year to year is my goal to finish out some series, because I basically lost interest in a lot of YA, but then looking at all the ongoing series I had, there were still a few that I wanted to go ahead and try out and finish. So I went ahead and finished most of those, and I think that's the main reason in accounting for the difference. But also I will say, I also feel like this will even out a little bit more as the year progresses, because I tend to do more readathons early on in the year, and I tend to gravitate towards more easy reads, like things that would veer more into young adult in those months, versus more adult books later in the year. So that could also be part of the reason for this. Either way, I don't anticipate this drastically changing too much. I definitely predominantly read adult books now, and I'm happy with that. So looking at what format of books I pick up, I'm actually not surprised at all that this is very consistent. My main reading format is audiobooks. It has been for many years, and it's funny that both so far this year and for the entirety of last year, I'm basically at 60 to 70% all audio, based on whether you are including the mixed media portion of this or not. I am staying fairly consistent with the amount of physical books I'm reading, but one thing I anticipate changing going forward is I think I will find myself reading more and more ebooks. And that's mainly because I've now inherited Jake's old Kindle and was gifted a stand and a clicker. So now that we finally have a headboard on our bed and I have a great place to put the stand, I intend to use that more, and we'll probably see an increase in the amount of ebooks I'm reading going forward. So one of the more interesting stats for me to check out is where I'm sourcing the books that I'm reading. This definitely helps me know if the subscriptions I'm paying for are worth it for me in the long run. And so that's a big reason that I track this. And I am not at all surprised to see here that the most two common places I source books are either from my library or from Everend. I am happy with this, though I do think in future there's a chance that I will be reading more of my own TBR, especially now that I've combined my collection with Jake and we have limited shelf space. So that might change in the future based on if I create myself a reading goal to read my physical TBR. But for now, I'm happy to see this very consistent, and I'm glad that I'm at least using the subscriptions that I pay for, like Everend and Audible. So one set of stats where I'm seeing some changes are, what genres am I picking up? And obviously the most predominant one in both of these is going to be fantasy, so no surprise there. but I was a little bit surprised to see that my percentage of fantasy is a little bit lower so far this year than it usually is. And like I've said earlier in this video, I think it's due to the amount of readathons I'm doing, because I usually save fantasy for later in the year and read shorter things that are other genres during those readathons. So I anticipate that this will kind of even out in the end. I'm also not very surprised to see an increase in the amount of thrillers I've been picking up and reading, especially since my husband Jake and I, the Bookish Drummer, have been doing our Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club, where we read either a thriller or horror book every month. What I am really surprised about here, though, is that this year I have read way more nonfiction than I usually do. I've already read 8, which is more than one a month, and for me that's pretty wild because usually I only read a handful in a year. The other thing that's really surprising me is that I have not been reaching for sci-fi very much this year. I've only read 5 of them, so that's definitely something I'm gonna have to improve upon because I do really enjoy sci-fi when I read it. So the next trend that I've noticed with my reading is that both this year so far and last year, I'm sitting at about 60-40 in terms of 60% authors I've read from before already and 40% new authors. And I'm definitely not mad to see authors I've read from before higher up on this wheel. While I do like giving new authors a chance to see if I'll enjoy their work, I definitely prefer to prioritize sequels, and I'm definitely more curious about reading more of authors' backlists from whom I've really enjoyed their books already. So I actually think in the future I won't be mad if I see the read from before category increase. But for now, it's interesting to see that this has remained consistent. So lastly, I like to also track what publishers I'm picking books up from. And really, I don't really care who publishes the book, but the main reason I track this, and I think will find it useful in the future, is when I get to the point of requesting ARCs, I will have a very good idea of what publishers I tend to gravitate towards and who I should maybe try and request from or build relationships with. So the most common traditional publishers I've picked up from this year are Tor and Orbit, which is not surprising, but I also do feel like this is a reflection of read-alongs or series I'm trying to work on in that year, because it can be different. Like if I'm looking at last year, it was actually Tor and Dot that were quite high on my list. But of course, last year I did a read-along for the Shattered Sand series, which are all published by Dot, and this year I've done a read-along for Lightbringer, which are all published by Orbit. So it's not really a surprise to me to see this differ, but it is interesting to me to see that I'm consistently picking up things published by Tor on my own, regardless of read-alongs. And of course, I always like to see that the self-published chunk of these is high as well. I am noticing that I haven't been reaching for quite as much self-pub this year as I have in previous years. And I think that's largely because I've been reading a lot from the library in Everend this year, having unexpectedly moved to the States. A lot of the books that I have that are indie are still back in Canada, and so that's a big reason for this change. But going forward, I anticipate the self-published section of my chart to be higher. So that was it for the stats and trends that I wanted to look at on my reading spreadsheet with you guys. What did you find the most interesting, and what trends, if any, have you noticed about your own reading? Let me know all that good stuff in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye.